Racist cop uses taser on black woman in court, unaware she's the judge. A white police officer pulled out his taser and struck a black woman in the middle of a courtroom, unaware that she was the highest authority of justice in that very room. And from that moment on, the entire legal system of Belmore County began to crumble. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. If you're looking for a story that will leave you furious, stunned, and unable to look away, stay until the end of this video. Because in just the first 8 seconds of a historic trial at the Belmore County Courthouse, justice was torn apart by a literal jolt of electricity. On Tuesday morning, at exactly 8:47 a.m., in courtroom 3B, a hearing was beginning over the wrongful arrest of a 14-year-old black teenager. The courtroom was packed. Legal reporters, public defenders, court clerks, all present. Standing at the very back was a white police officer named Eric Gray, 39 years old, assigned to support courtroom order, a task that seemed simple enough. But just minutes after the proceedings began, Eric suddenly stepped forward, his face cold and unreadable, and pulled out his taser in front of the stunned courtroom. No warning. No sign of danger from the other party. Just one pull of the trigger, and the electric probes shot straight into the chest of a woman in a black robe. That woman was Rith Johnson, a veteran federal judge who had presided over more than 400 cases and brought down some of the most powerful figures in the police system. But in that moment, in Eric's eyes, she was nothing more than a black woman who didn't belong in a position of such power. Blinded by racial prejudice and unchecked authority, Eric failed to realize who he had just attacked. Judge Rith had just issued a public demand for the internal records of the very police department Eric worked for. Within 24 hours before the hearing, she had ordered the court to obtain surveillance video footage, believed to have been tampered with, to conceal Eric's illegal conduct during the boy's arrest. And that may have been the real reason he acted. After a jolt lasting more than 5 seconds, Judge Rith collapsed at the bench, convulsing, unconscious. The courtroom froze in absolute silence until a piercing scream erupted from the left side. "You just shot a judge!" The air in the room shifted from shock to chaos. Court staff rushed forward, only to be blocked by Eric's fellow officers, who claimed they were ensuring officer safety. Less than a minute later, the court's live stream camera abruptly cut off, and the trial was suddenly postponed indefinitely due to technical issues. R.T.I. Johnson was rushed to the hospital unconscious, her heartbeat unstable. But she wasn't the only one attacked that day. What was paralyzed ran far deeper. The community's trust in a justice system they once believed was untouchable, and the twist no one saw coming. This incident was only the tip of a rotten structure Judge Rith had been pursuing for over 3 decades. But this time, she was the one targeted. And the man who pulled the trigger would soon learn. He picked the wrong person, the wrong moment, and the wrong move. Hit subscribe to find out what happened next, because this isn't just the story of one police officer, it's the unraveling of an entire network of power hiding something far more terrifying. Before that electric jolt shook the courtroom that morning, before millions came to know the name R.T. Johnson, she was already a silent legend in the legal world. People just didn't dare say it out loud. Born in 1965 in North Memphis, Rith grew up in a public housing project where the sound of late-night gunfire was more common than a good-night wish. When she was just 9, her father, a plumbing repairman, was wrongfully arrested in connection with a robbery he had nothing to do with. Despite no evidence, he was detained for 11 months, long enough to lose his job, lose their home, and nearly lose all faith in the system. RTIA once shared during a private lecture at Howard University. That was when I realized the law isn't always wrong, but the people operating it absolutely can be. She graduated with honors in criminal law from Morehouse College before earning a full scholarship to Yale Law School. When she returned to Belmore in 1989, no firm would hire a black female attorney. She worked unpaid for 18 months at a local community legal office, where she won her first case against the Belmore Police Department at just 27 years old. In 2004, Rith became the first black woman in Belmore state history to be appointed chief judge of the county court. Over 33 years, she presided over more than 400 criminal, civil, and federal cases, with the lowest appeal reversal rate in state history, just 2.4%. They said she had no friends in the industry, and that's exactly how she wanted it. No parties, no TV appearances. She had no Facebook, no Twitter, and never shared personal stories with the press. "Silence is more solid than any stone wall," she once said. In legal and judicial circles, they called her the Black Marble, the unbreakable stone. She survived 2 internal investigations by the Department of Justice when accused of bias toward people of color, yet not a single allegation was ever proven. On the contrary, it was the records she released that exposed 8 major misconduct cases involving the then-sitting police chief, ultimately forcing him to resign. Her philosophy was unwavering. "I don't serve white justice. I don't serve black justice. I serve the law, and no one stands above it." No one. The hearing that morning, the day she was attacked with a taser by Eric Gray, wasn't a high-profile case, but it was a critical link in a decaying network of power. The arrested child, a 14-year-old black boy, had been unlawfully held for 72 hours without parental contact, without legal counsel. All records appeared consistent, but Rith sensed something was wrong. She demanded all surveillance footage from the police station. She called for witness testimony. She even ordered the release of an internal audio recording, one that had never been disclosed. That was when she became a thorn in the side of those trying to cover things up. No one expected that a woman with just a few well-placed questions could push a guilty man to the edge of self-control. No one expected that pure integrity could shake a hidden system so badly that it would respond with violence. But that's what happens when you come for someone who's lived their entire life becoming an unshakable symbol of justice. To understand why R. Ty Johnson, a symbol of justice, became the target of a taser strike right at the judge's bench, we have to look at the man who pulled the trigger. Eric Gray, 39 years old, a longtime patrol officer with the Belmore Police Department, and a walking weapon of violence who was kept on the force for nearly 2 decades despite a long record of misconduct. Joining the force in 2009, Eric was once described in the department's internal newsletter as exceptionally loyal to the principle of absolute order, a euphemism for violent, unilateral, and near-lawless conduct. Over 14 years, Eric was involved in more than 70 controversial arrests, with 17 formal complaints filed by civilians, most of them people of color. Coincidentally, all cases were resolved internally and closed without disciplinary action. Between 2017 and 2023, Eric used a taser on 9 civilians. 7 of them were unarmed black individuals, and 3 were women. In a leaked internal audio recording, he was heard saying, "The only thing these people understand is electricity. The sooner, the less trouble." But behind this seemingly blunt man was a far darker structure. Independent investigations revealed that Eric was linked to a secret internal group called G03, a network composed of officers, technicians, and certain judicial officials, specialized in sabotaging records, tampering with evidence, and protecting their own. A former colleague, speaking anonymously, once testified, "Eric doesn't act on his own. He's a tool, an enforcer for orders no one wants their name on." What happens when you let a man like that, racist, intolerant of being questioned, walk into a courtroom presided over by a black woman, who has the authority to demand his investigation? On the morning of the incident, Eric was assigned to security assistance for the hearing of the 14-year-old wrongfully detained boy, a case that could unravel years of systemic abuse. In the prep room, according to an administrative staffer, Eric bluntly stated, "They think wearing a robe makes them gods? Today I'll show them what order means." When the hearing began, his expression was smug, standing in the back as if indifferent. But when Rith Johnson directly questioned the edited surveillance footage, his face turned alert and unstable. One witness reported that his hand gripped the taser handle tightly the second time she brought it up. According to a psychological report reviewed by a federal court in 2016, after a failed assault lawsuit, Eric showed signs of boundary-violating behavior when questioned by Black women in institutional settings. But the Belmore Police Department didn't suspend him. On the contrary, they reassigned him to high-stakes hearings, as if to send a message. The attack on Rith was not a spontaneous act. It was a calculated response, where Eric was both the instrument and the symbol of a toxic system built on fear and racial supremacy. He didn't shoot at a person. He shot at the principle of law, at the will that refuses to yield, and at the existence of a Black woman bold enough to say no in a room full of powerful white men. And in that very moment, he triggered the earthquake that would shake the entire system to its core. When the sound of the taser rang out, all official cameras in courtroom 3B were cut off within just 10 seconds. The entire live stream feed on the court's public system was abruptly cut off with a notice: technical error. But there was one thing Eric Gray, and the entire machine behind him, did not know. There was a secondary camera mounted in the dome ceiling corner, not listed on any official equipment diagram. Only one person knew about this camera: the courthouse's chief technical officer, who had installed it after a mysterious power outage last year as a backup measure. And it was from this camera that the truth was captured, undeniably. The auxiliary video clearly showed Eric Gray stood 7 meters from the judge's bench, not under threat, with no one blocking his path. He reached into his right jacket pocket, pulled out a taser, and stared directly at Rith Johnson. Just 2 seconds earlier, a man in a blue suit in the back row tilted his head slightly toward Eric, then held up 2 fingers, a signal, and after that, Eric pulled the trigger. When the footage was reviewed and uploaded to the public system, the first 13 seconds were completely cut. No signal, no shot of Eric acting first. It started only from the moment Rith Johnson collapsed. And that's why the original file was anonymously sent to her, Mia Carter. Mia Carter, 32, was a former investigative journalist for the Belmore Times. She was fired 2 years earlier for unauthorized access to federal records, though in truth, she had been investigating a covert unit of police officers who framed innocent people to boost arrest numbers. Since then, Mia had worked as a freelance journalist, surviving on stipends and Patreon support from loyal readers. The moment she opened the raw video, Mia couldn't believe her eyes. Not only was it a clear, deliberate attack, but the go-ahead signal had come from Edward Hemsworth, the man in the blue suit, later confirmed to be an internal advisor for the Belmore State Department of Justice. This man had been involved in 4 secret settlements with police and had deep ties to G03, the mutual protection network of those who didn't want to be investigated. Maya immediately tried to upload the video to her private platform, but within 90 seconds, her system was blocked. Her server went dark. The video file was remotely encrypted, using a protocol that could only be triggered from the state's Central Judicial Tech Command. In other words, someone high up knew the footage had been extracted and moved fast to erase the trail. But what they didn't know was that Mia had already backed up the original file to 3 separate external drives, all offline. She knew that to release the truth, she couldn't go alone. And the only person who could help him was someone who had once been intimidated by Eric Gray himself, but never dared speak out. Robert Wills, a former court security technician who once worked under Hemsworth and knew exactly how the court's encryption system operated. They exchanged no more than 3 lines. "Are you still afraid?" "Of course. But this time, I hate myself more than I fear them." "Then let's begin." And that was the moment the real battle began. Not inside the courtroom, but across the media networks, the court infrastructure, and the inner circles of the police. When the electric shock stunned the courtroom into silence, Robert Wills, 43, head of the Court Security Support Unit, was standing just behind the gallery, with a direct line of sight. The hidden camera footage showed he saw everything: Eric Gray's hand on the taser, the subtle signal from the man in the suit. But Robert didn't move. Many called him a coward. He had once called himself the same. But to understand why Robert stayed silent that day, we must go back to 2020, when he was the only one who dared speak up after a piece of evidence was faked in courtroom 2D. The victim was a 19-year-old black man, wrongfully convicted because the surveillance footage didn't exist. Robert found a copy on a backup server and submitted it to superiors. The result? He was reassigned, his file marked internal disruption, and he received no raise for a year. "I learned something," Robert told Mia Carter during a secret meeting at a diner on the outskirts of town. "No one wants the truth if the truth costs them their job." Robert and Mia met on a cold, rainy evening at Little Ann's Diner, where only sad jazz and dim yellow lights lingered. Maya opened her laptop and replayed the footage from the secondary camera. Robert stared at the screen, his hand tightening. "Do you see the signal?" Robert nodded. "I saw it that day, but I didn't understand it. I thought it was just their business until she got shot." Then he revealed, just minutes before the hearing, he'd received a call from an unknown number, a man's voice sharp and commanding. "If Eric goes hard, let him handle it. Do not interfere." Robert didn't ask who it was, didn't push back. He simply hung up, swallowing the lump in his throat. But the moment Reith Johnson collapsed onto the wooden floor, her body convulsing, that image haunted him every night for nearly a month. "I'm an officer," he said, "but that day I was just a puppet, pulled by strings I couldn't see." And in that very moment, when Mia placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes not judging but resolute, Robert chose to stand on the side of truth. He agreed to record a full testimony, legally verified by a neutral attorney. Every detail, from the phone order, the hand signal, Reith's fall, to the reactions of surrounding officers, was documented with names, timestamps, and specific locations. The entire file was encrypted and sent directly to Nolan Reed, head of the Federal Justice Department's Office of Internal Oversight. Nolan, a former prosecutor with a 94% success rate in misconduct investigations, responded within just 6 hours. "If what you've submitted is real, this isn't just an assault. This is a crime designed at the highest level." From that moment on, the case was no longer about Reith personally, no longer about a rogue act done by Eric Gray. It had officially escalated into a national-level investigation, where each hidden figure behind the uniforms, the robes, and the government titles began to emerge, one by one. And the very man once labeled a coward had now become the spark for the largest purge in the history of Belmore's justice system. His name was Nolan Reed, 41 years old, one of the most successful civil rights attorneys in the southeastern United States. With 3 successful lawsuits against police departments in 3 different states, Nolan was no stranger to the shadows of the American justice system. But when he received the 213-page dossier from Robert Wills, along with the extracted video from Mia Carter, Nolan knew this wasn't just a case. This was a declaration of war. Within 36 hours of accessing the documents, Nolan and his legal team reconstructed the full chain of events. 17 quietly handled cases involving Eric Gray from 2012 to 2023. 13 victims were Black, 2 were Latino, 1 was Indigenous, and only 1 was white. In 11 of those cases, courtroom video data disappeared. In the remaining 4, it was overwritten due to technical errors. 7 public defenders who worked on those cases resigned under internal pressure. Nolan uncovered a pattern of organized interference, internally referred to as the G Network, short for Gideon, believed to be led by the State Justice Department's head of security systems. His full name, Gideon Reeves, 55 years old, a senior cybersecurity expert, formerly employed by 3 defense contractors before arriving in Belmore. Reeves had direct access to the courthouse camera systems, the ability to encrypt data, and full control over live stream routing. The second name in the file was Edward Hemsworth, senior judicial advisor, previously investigated 3 times internally, but never indicted. Hemsworth was physically present at Rith Johnson's hearing, seated in the back row, and gave the hand signal to Eric Gray just before the taser was fired. Alongside Mia Carter, Nolan compiled every piece of evidence, from recordings of illegal phone calls, leaked internal emails, to organizational diagrams with tagged responsibilities, to prepare an emergency subpoena request from the Ninth Circuit Federal Court. A press conference was held directly in front of Belmore City Hall. The sky was lightly drizzling, but over 80 citizens and 11 independent media outlets showed up. Nolan didn't say much. He simply held up a silver USB stick and played the first 34 seconds of the unreleased video. Eric Gray standing upright, his eyes fixed on the signal from Hemsworth. He drew his taser, said nothing, and pulled the trigger. Artie Johnson collapsed, surrounded by lawyers, officers, and witnesses. "This is the justice you've been served in Belmore," Nolan said. "But it doesn't last another day." At that same moment, Mia released the full video to an open international platform. Within 12 hours, the clip garnered over 3.2 million views, shared by high-profile figures like Angela Rye, Sean King, and the Federal Black Lawyers Association. Over the next 48 hours, 5 human rights organizations demanded a full-scale civil investigation, and the Federal Department of Justice was forced to respond. This marked the first civil rights probe in Belmore in 25 years, and the first time the covert judicial surveillance system of a southern state was publicly scrutinized. But Nolan knew that even with the video going viral, even with the media on board, as long as Eric Gray remained hidden, justice would remain just a slogan. Because Gray was the critical link, the man holding the final secret capable of toppling the entire G Network. And Nolan Reed, who had brought light into the darkest corners of the law, understood one thing clearly. To win, he had to bring Eric Gray into the light, alive. After Eric Gray tased Judge Rith Johnson in open court, a brazen assault in front of dozens of witnesses and cameras, everyone expected an immediate arrest warrant. But that didn't happen. Instead, Eric was merely suspended, pending internal investigation. A week later, when Nolan Reed submitted the emergency subpoena request, the sheriff's office reported that Eric could no longer be contacted. His residence was empty. His phone was off. His vehicle's GPS was disabled. His bank accounts had been emptied within 6 hours of his suspension. The last transactions were traced to 2 private gas stations along Highway 81, heading toward the Canadian border. All signs pointed to one conclusion: Eric was on the run. Within the next 72 hours, Nolan worked with the regional FBI office to transfer the entire case file to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. With over 200 pages of documentation, the unreleased video, and Robert Wills's verified testimony, the FBI issued a federal arrest warrant for Eric Gray on June 1st at 1:45 p.m. The manhunt was officially underway. Traffic camera footage at the Indian Lake toll booth captured a gray Ford Explorer with Georgia plates, driven by Eric himself, heading north toward Vermont, just over 100 kilometers from the Canadian border. The FBI swiftly traced every transaction Eric had made in the past 3 months, from gas stations, motels, to outdoor equipment stores. At a small roadside inn called Silver Pines in the outskirts of Darby Line, Vermont, a cleaning staff member testified that a tall white man, matching Eric's description, had stayed in room 203 for 2 nights, paid in cash, and left no identification. A fingerprint collected from the bathroom faucet matched Eric Gray in the FBI database. The fugitive task force immediately deployed drones with thermal sensors over the Barren Trail region, an area known for abandoned hunting cabins. The Ford Explorer was found at the edge of a wooded trail, its door wide open. Inside was a map marked with a specific location, cabin number 9, and several coded notations. When the strike team arrived at dawn on June 14th, they saw black smoke rising from the wooden cabin. Eric was burning a pile of documents and devices, including a personal laptop, external hard drives, and a high-level access card, normally issued only to courthouse data controllers. Eric was subdued after 4 minutes. As he was handcuffed, he smirked coldly and said just one sentence: "I only did what they told me. You'll never take the system down." But at that exact moment, Mia Carter, monitoring the operation live from the Federal Command Center, whispered through her earpiece, "You just fired the first shot. The wall is coming down." With what had been recovered, from encrypted data to the high-clearance access card, and Eric's statement implicating a chain of higher powers, the investigation officially moved beyond a single man. It now touched the very core of the state's judicial infrastructure, where the law had been manipulated in secret for nearly 2 decades. Eric was flown to Washington, D.C. on a private aircraft, but not as a law enforcement officer, once shielded by a badge. He was held in a Level 4 security facility, reserved for suspects under investigation for betraying the trust of justice. On August 19th, in Washington, D.C., the Fourth Circuit Federal Court opened a special hearing, dubbed by the media as Belmore's Trial of the Century. On paper, it was a prosecution of a police officer for assaulting a federal official. But everyone knew this was the first step in exposing a decades-long network of corrupted power. To ensure maximum security, the trial was held in courtroom 7F, previously used for high-level federal cases. 5 FBI agents, 8 federal marshals, and 4 cybersecurity specialists were deployed to monitor the proceedings. All display equipment, storage drives, and surveillance cameras were dual encrypted and backed up through the federal justice system. And then, the courtroom doors opened. R.T.I. Johnson, the woman who had collapsed to the floor after Eric Gray's taser blast, walked in. It was her first public appearance since the attack. Thinner, her hair now streaked with gray, but her gaze remained unwavering. When invited to the witness stand, she did not flinch. She looked directly at Eric, now seated between 2 federal officers, wearing a gray prison jumpsuit. And she spoke, her voice quiet, but echoing throughout the room. "You didn't just attack me. You attacked the belief that the law can protect the powerless. But I'm still here, and justice doesn't sleep." 43 witnesses were called to testify, individuals who had been tased by Eric without cause. audio engineers who decoded segments of altered recordings, Nolan's team of digital experts who demonstrated how the data had been manipulated, and finally, Mia Carter herself, who ignited the investigation, took the stand with 4 hard drives containing the entire record of the cover-up. The entire trial was broadcast live on the official YouTube channel of the U.S. Department of Justice, garnering over 4.7 million views in the first 2 days. From Atlanta to Minneapolis, civil rights groups held watch parties in schools, churches, and cafes, because this wasn't just a trial. It was a living lesson on justice that cannot be silenced. When the unedited, uncut video was shown in court, the room fell into stunned silence. Eric stood up, looked at Rith, and growled. I said, "Shut up." Then came the crackle of the taser, the sound of a body collapsing, and silence. Nolan Reed stood. In a firm voice, he delivered his closing argument. No one has the right to use a badge to hide violence, and no one stands above the law, especially those who swore to protect it. The forensic evidence showed Eric did not act alone. He was aided by Gideon Reeves and Edward Hemsworth, both of whom now faced separate subpoenas. But today, justice belonged to Eric, the man who thought he would walk away. Eric's defense attorney abruptly withdrew on day 3 of the trial after being caught submitting a duplicate document with a #256 hash that didn't match the original file. Eric remained silent. He did not plead guilty, did not defend himself, merely sat motionless, unable to meet the gaze of the witness stand. After 7 days of proceedings, the jury took just 45 minutes to reach a unanimous verdict. Guilty. On all counts: assault on a federal judicial officer, abuse of coercive instruments, destruction of federal evidence, conspiracy to sabotage the justice system. The sentence was read at 4:12 p.m. on August 26th. 28 years in federal prison, no parole, permanently barred from all law enforcement agencies. All former system access was permanently revoked. His bank accounts and internal communications were frozen to support ongoing investigations. As he was escorted out, Eric turned and looked back at Rithy Johnson one last time. No longer the arrogant man in uniform, no longer the one barking silence, but a fearful man. A man who, for the first time in his life, had been sentenced. The trial of Eric Gray came to a close, but the story was far from over. It was merely the prelude to a historic purge, where those who once believed themselves invisible within an untouchable system began to see the walls fall. In the following week, Gideon Reeves, former senior technical director of the Belmore Justice Office, abruptly announced his resignation just hours after his name surfaced in court records. But public reaction erupted when the Federal Department of Justice officially indicted him for obstruction of justice and tampering with federal evidence, a charge carrying up to 15 years in prison. Not only that, Edward Hemsworth, the familiar face seen in the footage signaling Eric to act, lost his judicial immunity completely. A thorough audit revealed that the evidence he had previously submitted in court between 2012 and 2018 had either been falsified or erased, resulting in a permanent ban from the legal profession. In parallel with these top-level indictments, 7 mid-level officers in the Belmore Police Department were placed under emergency investigation for being links in the chain of false reports concerning the unlawful detention of people of color. Evidence included altered images, redacted courtroom footage, and concealed warrant logs tied to Reeves. As a result, the Belmore Police Department, once considered one of the most formidable forces in the state, was placed under special federal oversight. Federal inspectors collaborated with the Belmore Community Council to form a temporary leadership board, collecting input from residents and ensuring unrestricted civilian control over police governance. A major legal shift occurred at the state Justice Department, as the Internal Judicial Technology Division was completely disbanded, replaced by a new security and tech infrastructure operated by independent organizations, with audits conducted 4 times per year. The hard numbers couldn't be ignored. 61 previously dismissed or stalled cases, suspected of evidence tampering, were reopened for full investigation. From Belmore, a legal fund was established to support the wrongfully accused, named the Right to Justice Legal Fund, launching with $5 million in capital and serving over 1,200 vulnerable individuals. Notably, over 800,000 citizens signed an online petition demanding statewide police reform, resulting in 5 states announcing police reconstruction plans within 3 months. Soon, the events in Belmore became the spark for a national movement. States like Michigan, Georgia, and Pennsylvania began reopening court cases marked by data loss anomalies, launching a wave of cross-border investigations. Across the country, human rights groups dubbed it the Speak Up Surge, a nationwide legal campaign aimed at demanding accountability and enforcing transparency in institutional data protection. One sociologist wrote in the Federal Review, "Belmore wasn't the beginning. It was the breaking point, a signal that when those in power are dragged into the light, the system must be rebuilt from its roots." I hope you enjoyed this story. Please like the video and subscribe so you won't miss the next one.